authorize. And misconduct is defined as plagiarism. What else?
Plagiarism.
There's three of them.
Falsification.
Falsification and fabrication. So those are the three items. And that there's cases of whistleblowing where people find something that's wrong, they think is wrong, and that they see something, they say something. And we discussed this little case here. And for those of you that didn't go through it last week, you can read this little case and think about really who was guilty here. Was it the PI that maybe mispublished the figure, or was it the postdoc that made the complaint? And one thing we talked about a little bit is, if you are a whistleblower, what are some of the things you have to worry about doing? And this was that little tiny slide that we had last week. I made it a little bigger, but it's also on the website if you need it. And it's basically, if you see something and you need to say something, these are kind of some of the steps you want. What was this? And that is, consider alternative explanations. Maybe that person, really? You may be wrong. You may have misjudged what's going on in the situation. Ask questions, don't accuse, be aware of any documentation that supports your concerns and where it is. If it's a figure, like we talked about last time, if someone fabricated or falsified a printout from some sort of a machine that measured something, you have the original printout, have the final figure that's in the manuscript. If they're different, then you have evidence. Separate your personal and professional feelings or problems. Think about how you would how would you like the problem to be resolved? Do you want the person to go to jail? Is that what you want, or do you just want the data to be good so you can publish a paper and finish your degree? I mean, what's the outcome that you want? Seek advice from someone you can trust and take it seriously. That is, consult someone objectively to evaluate these issues and listen to what they have to say. And then get a second opinion and take that also seriously. If you're going to file charges, you may want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and you want to have somebody that's on your side. If you decide to initiate formal proceedings, it's easier if you have that support from these folks, and if you have that support of actual physical evidence that would pertain to what your claim is. Find out where to file charges and do it properly. And here at the university, it's the Office of the Vice President for Research, and you could go through a dean, and then that'll go up to the VPR's office from there. File charges objectively. As a complainant, you need to say objectively what happened, and then throughout the investigation, ask questions and keep thorough notes for yourself. But stay out of it unless someone asks you to be involved. And then be patient. It takes years. It takes years and years and years to go through the process. I talked about this video, which is now on the scan screen thing, Joe, that you can go log into at the Office of Research Integrity, and it's called the Lab. And for those of you, for those of you that may need to make up some time, that's a good thing to log on to and review. And just sit down and go through it. It's an interactive video. It's very. Has anybody done it yet? I know I mentioned it last week. We did.
Yeah. Well, it was a while ago when you took us through the lab series.
Oh, right.
In pub ad class.
Oh, okay.
At least 3 years ago.
Okay, yeah, and it's basically the same. And you can just Google ORI the lab and it'll come up. But that's the Office of Research Integrity. I'll just write that here. Office of Research Integrity. And it's in Health and Human Services, part of the .gov. Okay. So that's the whole issue of whistleblowing, and the lab really centers on a graduate student that goes through the process of whistleblowing about a situation having to do with a paper that was published and wasn't authorized. And it's very entertaining, as well as it's got a lot of insight to it. And Joe, we can go back to the PowerPoint. The Office of Research Integrity does print out every so often. Well, it continues to add on to cases of research misconduct, and those are the 2014, and here's the 2015 so far. And in this, let me back up on here. In this particular case, the last one that's logged in for 2015 is that the Office of Research Integrity found the respondent engaged in research misconduct by falsifying data. And in this publication, it details quite a bit about, this is the CFR, which I showed. The only words you got to worry about here is plagiarism, falsification, and fabrication. That's what the CFR talks about for what actual research misconduct is. And we talked about last time, again, we're almost up to date here, about actual misconduct. It used to be thought and that it was only 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000, and because of survey data and others, it's been estimated closer to 1 in 100, where people actually bend the rules and aren't doing science the way they should be doing. And we talked about last time, one of the issues is this irreproducibility. This was a cancer group that got together in San Diego last year and said they tried to replicate 50 studies. So a project was undertaken by Amgen researchers to reproduce the results of 50 studies. The vast majority were not reproducible even by the original researchers. So in the medical industry, that's huge if you're working on trying to treat people and save lives, so to speak, or make progress in cancer treatments and other things. These are the announcements of the regulation. Just to say that it's didn't happen until 2010, and then USDA came on in 2013, and there's probably a couple others down the pipe. And these are the standards that we're talking about, and we've already talked about a number of things. And for instance, mentorship, we're going to dwell on more today. We talked a little bit about it last time. We're going to talk about your experiences in talking with your mentors and such. We talked about whistleblower ethics already, and we'll cover a lot of these other areas throughout the rest of the 10 weeks. We talked about whether it's a good idea to nip it in the bud. And in other words, is if you see something, should you jump on it right then and just talk right away to your coworker? And we talked about some issues of maybe power differentials. Maybe one person was the boss and the other one, was the grad student, let's say, or it was giving you your grade or paying your salary or something. And you may not feel like you can step in and say something. A lot of you said, yeah, I would say something, and because that's my data. That we're working together on this project. That affects how my outcomes are going to be, and I don't want old Bob here to affect my future. So I'm going to say something. And then there's the pie charts. I don't think I put those back on here. That more than half the people that encountered this kind of a situation actually did say something, and of that, about half of the people that did say something, about 2/3 of them, things worked out pretty good. So you have to judge whether that's going to work for you if you see something and then say it. And then to mentoring, this is where we'll sort of launch into our discussion for those of you that were able to talk to your mentor, is that mentoring alone may be insufficient, but mentoring is essential to promote a positive attitude towards what research ethics is about, and then also it's your duty. If you're a professional, trying to get off the squeaky part. If you're a professional, it's your duty to take an active role in helping and train the next generation of researchers, whether they're in industry or whether they're in academia, or no matter where they are. So how you learn those duties is part of all this. And then, I guess finally, I think, it might be the last one, is that both you as the trainee or mentee and your mentor or your advisor both have responsibilities to make this relationship work in mentoring. And that includes common things in communication. You need to talk to each other, and hopefully this exercise was a step in the right direction there. Trust each other about giving advice and getting advice. Be available and accessible. Be flexible. And then as a student, develop independence. Get the heck out of there. Don't stay around for 12 or 15 years, unless, it's, really cush. That's okay, I guess. But, you want to get out and get your own career around it, and that helps everybody. So that's where we got to pretty much last week. So let's talk about animals, then we'll talk about the other animals, which would be people, and just a minute here. So we'll launch into this. So ethical issues behind using animals in research and what you need to do. Don't go to sleep. This will be relevant at some point. And it's just really interesting. So I'm going to talk about the IACUC, which is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, IACUC, and why there's all these animal regulations, and there's something about the 3 R's and why a monkey needs a lawyer. Anybody know who this is? It's Pavlov's dog. What do you know about Pavlov's dog? This is an animal and research sort of issue here. What do you know about Pavlov's dog? The interesting thing about Pavlov is that I think he got a Nobel Prize in 1901 for discovering and describing peptidase in some of the salivary enzymes. And the process, just to cut to the quick, the process was he was able to present food, the dog would salivate, they'd collect the saliva, analyze it, figure out what it was chemically, and then he'd work down the gut all the way to the stomach, and he'd cut here, and the food would fall out here, and they'd collect whatever came out, the glands produced. And then he was able to make cuts also in some of the gastric area, so the meat would fall out before it actually filled up the stomach. He'd collect that stuff too, and these dogs, you see pictures of them, and they're all sitting there. They're kind of happy little dogs, but they have these little flaps of skin that are sewed up and used. But then he figured out peptidase in particular was really good at settling the stomach, and he did this by looking at some of the actions of that salivary enzyme, and came up with the whole. What's peptidase sound like in upset stomach? What? Pepto-Bismol, right? He marketed little vials of Pepto. I don't know if he called it Pepto-Bismol, but later it became the pink stuff that we use to settle our stomach. Now it's not the same stuff from dogs that he did, but he'd peddle it. So he had a little warehouse of dogs lined up, and they'd manufacture this peptidase and they'd market it. So there's a use. I mean, animals in research, but then also kind of crosses the boundary into industry, and there's some questions about regulation and poor dogs and all that. But that's the way animals were treated for a long time. And so this is just all you need to know. This slide is what you need to know if you do anything with animals at UNM, or for that matter, any university campus. Anybody that's affiliated with UNM must have an approved animal care and use protocol that's approved by the IACUC, and that includes using any live or vertebrate animals. It includes amphibians, birds, fish, mammals, reptiles, or vertebrate animal tissue. Doesn't include cockroaches, doesn't include worms, doesn't include other little things that don't have vertebrae. But it does include breeding and holding, field lab, or tissue protocols. The museums have a protocol that is a blanket that allows them to collect animals for their collections. There's an electronic process to submit your protocols to get it reviewed and approved. And there's trainings that go on. So you have to do some training as well to get an animal protocol. So it's anytime you use animals. I guess the ontogeny or the evolution of the animal protection laws included, let's say in New York, 1828, there's an anti-cruelty law where your donkey couldn't die in a city street. It wouldn't move. You couldn't beat it until it died. You couldn't do that. Then there was a 28-hour law where if you're traveling through the country with livestock, you had to stop every 28 hours and exercise, food, and water. So that was again for animals' benefit. It was all the way up until the Nuremberg trials after World War II that said if you're going to do work on human subjects, you need to do it on animals first. So that was really the first time that researchers started using animal models in a real regular way, or after that time. Then Pepper disappeared. Pepper was a family in Virginia, I think, their pet dog, and it disappeared. Well, it didn't show up again until this Life magazine expose about people who would steal people's pets, sell them to medical labs, and they'd be used in medical experiments. There's Pepper, poor Pepper. And that same year, Congress passed the Lab Animal Welfare Act. I have the guide for the care and use of lab animals, and this is the guide in 2011, and it's been updated a number of times to mostly for caging and requirements and food and care and things like that. Some things here in the guide, how it defines animals. An animal is not a member of the genus Rattus, mus, or birds that are raised for research. So rats and mice, lab rats and mice, are not considered animals according to the Animal Welfare Act. They are covered, however, under other regulations under the USDA. So it regulates the facilities, the operations, and it sets up the IACUC and how the IACUC is supposed to administer it. There's some other guidances that, there's this Office of Lab Animal Welfare, kind of like the Office of Research Integrity in Health and Human Services. The Office of Lab Animal Welfare oversees through the Public Health Service on how animals are cared and used in research. The IACUC, which is a committee, it has a chair, it has a veterinarian. So we have a veterinarian here on campus. There's scientific and non-scientific members and non-affiliated members. What's a non-affiliated member? What's that mean?
Somebody that's not tied to that research?
Or not even tied to UNM. So someone outside of UNM. So non-scientific might be someone that's not a scientist, but still serves to employee of the university. That reviews and approves these protocols. Facilities are inspected every 6 months. They investigate any claims any claims that have to do with animal welfare, and then there's all the compliance to the guidelines. The main concerns of the IACUC is animals' pain and distress, and that's any study that has to do with pain and distress. And then there's these pain and distress categories. I don't know why there's no category A, but category B is just breeding and holding, and then C are procedures that have no pain. And then there's kind of a line here. Then there's category D and E, which have some sort of procedures that involve pain and distress, or no more than minimal pain and distress, or momentary pain and distress, I guess, but have anesthetics or analgesics involved. And then category E, it's unalleviated. It's a procedure that might involve pain and distress, but are not alleviated by chemicals or drugs. Those are rare and have to be scientifically justified. These are fairly common. What do you think is an example of a no pain category C procedure, or having less than or momentary pain and distress?
If you're testing toothpaste or something?
Yeah, that'd probably be a good one, yeah. Little rodent. Yeah, or behavioral stuff, or observing things that I mean, you can maybe do water maze, I suppose, or something that mazes that they have rewards and such. Actually, euthanasia is also a category C. So actually, what's euthanasia?
It's killing something of an animal.
Yeah, it's a humane, a painless death. So if you kill them quick, then it's less than momentary pain and distress. And then these are survival surgeries usually. And then these again would be things like learned helplessness. You've maybe heard of some psychology trials where they'll have an electrified grid in a cage, and the little mouse it's a mild shock, but it's a shock just the same, and the mouse will try to escape, but it can't escape, and it'll just eventually just sit there and take the shock, and that's called a learned helplessness model. There's not, again, they're fairly rare, but that's an example. Then there's the 3 R's: reduce, refine, replace, not reuse, recycle, and whatever. It's reducing the number of animals used, refinements, techniques that reduce pain and distress, and then replace. Use lower sentient animals. Like what? So if you're going to do a study on, I don't know, sleep deprivation or something like that, and you want to be able to know how it works on humans. If you turn the light on every 5 minutes, wake them up, and you take some brain chemical, some blood reading, then let them go to sleep, then turn the light back on, wake them up. That could be considered cruel, I suppose. But would you do that on on chimps? Would you do it on cats? Would you do it on ducks? Would you do it on fish?
That's done on soldiers all the time.
That's right. I guess so. I forgot about that part. So you ought to suggest to your CO that they do it on fish. That'd be a less sentient being. So the whole idea is that lower on the phylogenetic scale, so there's a lower sentience. That's funny. Okay, and then you do these online protocols. Just something I want you to think about recently, as recent as last April. There's these two monkeys, two chimps at Stony Brook, Leo and Hercules, that were actually at one point given habeas corpus. In other words, their day in court, because they quote wanted to be released from this animal facility. Now, how they wanted to be released is they were represented by this group called, it's here somewhere. Yes, where's that? Yeah, the third line down. Oh, okay, good. The Non-Human Rights Project. And so the judge said, yeah, they get their day in court. Then quickly, like 24 hours later, they said, no, they don't really get habeas corpus. But we're still going to hear the case. And it went on from April to May until finally last week or something. There's the Non-Human Rights Project. You can go listen about Hercules. He's quite the chimp. End of July, last month, the New York judge denied the request to extend legal rights to the two chimps. So in a case watched by animal rights activists and courtroom curiosity seekers, the state Supreme Court judge in Manhattan on Thursday denied a request to free a pair of chimps, Hercules and Leo, that are being held at a state university that sought writ of habeas corpus. An age-old method of challenging unlawful imprisonment was the latest attempt by a nonprofit Non-Human Rights Project to establish apes as legal persons. The group argues that chimps are self-aware and autonomous. A contention is supported by submitting affidavits attesting to the animal's intelligence, language skills, and personalities, among other traits, in several cases filed in New York on behalf of the various imprisoned primates. So I guess well, I don't know. What do you think? There's no point. What do you think? Ooh. That's true. If corporations are people, I guess so are chimps. So where's the line? Where's the line between, or I guess of autonomy or so when they say they submitted affidavits attested to the intelligence or language skills and personalities. I mean, I have a new 9-week-old puppy now, and that dog, I mean, that thing's got personality.
Dogs are really intelligent.
Yeah. So what could I claim that, I mean, that's a being that has autonomy and has rights and
I wouldn't recommend making them a dependent on your taxes.
no.
I've tried, it doesn't work at
No,
all.
no, right. I won't do that. I just wanted to know how far you could possibly take this, and I mean, it's gone from the New York law where you can't beat your donkey to death in the middle of the street. Animals are property. At least that's been the rule. To Hercules, or dolphins, or I don't know, squid. They're pretty smart, actually. Octopi. Anyway, I just put that out there.
Well, that's one of the issues between admiralty law and a constitutional law of the land.
Ah.
Under admiralty law, which is what pretty much most of the planet is under, everything is property, everything can be annotated on a spreadsheet by an accountant.
I got to put you back on the screen here. There you are. Well, you're on my screen. You're not on the big screen. Oh yeah, there you are. Admiral. Oh, okay. So, and the opposite, or the domestic law. What did you refer to that as?
The law of the land, which is the U.S. Constitution, it limits what legal fictions can do, governments, corporations, everything else. because under the common law, the law of the land, everyone was simply expected to have a minimum respect for the land around. Our nation was founded on Christian principles as contained in the Bible, and one of which is respect of nature, because that is God's creation.
Okay.
Now, under admiralty law, which is also known as contract law, everything comes down to money and everything is property, including all of us.
Ooh. Okay. All right. Any questions about using animals in research? And we'll do the last chunk in 10 minutes on human subjects. If I can get over to wait. There we go. Okay, human subjects and the how use of humans in research is used is very similar to how we view animals in research in lots of ways. There's an institutional review board instead of the IACUC. This is the IRB, and see, it's a really easy process to navigate, to get through. There's all sorts of rules and regulations, basically, and then it says grind through IRB review, and then it says approved, hopefully, and then it says start again, which is basically true. IACUC's, the animal protocols are good for 3 years if they're approved. IRB are good for 1 year at most, and then you have to get another approval done. So, as you know, and if you use humans in research in any sorts of way, actually that's a prairie dog, so that doesn't count. But whether they're little blue pills or blue fluid or some guy with wires on his head, or you're asking somebody an opinion about anything, or you're looking at other cultures or oral histories, all that falls under some sort of institutional review board review. And what the questions that they'll ask, the IRB will ask is it research? Is it a human subject? And if you fall under those those definitions, those are the IRB definitions, then you have to submit a protocol for review and approval. And what the IRB committee does is they look at the benefit and the risk, as defined there, to I guess categorize your protocol, but then also before it's approved. There's a couple of events that led up to an ethics go for using humans in research. All these you've heard of before, I'm sure. Nuremberg trials after World War II. And there's some history before this, before Nuremberg, actually, about humans and others. But there's 10 points. Voluntary consent is essential of the human subject. Experimentation should have some results that benefit society. Experiments should be based on animals again. This is where this came up from. Experiments should be conducted to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. You shouldn't expect to die if you take part in a human subjects research. The degree of risk, it shouldn't exceed, again, what the benefit is supposed to be. There must be proper facilities and preparations, and it should be conducted by someone that's qualified to do the work. The experiment, the person should be at liberty to stop their involvement at any time or stop the experiment at any time. And then the scientist in charge must also be willing to stop it. Tuskegee is probably the most notable. It's where almost 400 African-American males that had syphilis were enrolled in a study. They were given, quote, free medical exams but never told about their disease. This went on for 40 years, and they weren't treated for syphilis even after penicillin, which did treat syphilis, became available in the 50s. Penicillin was actually around the late 30s, early 40s, but only was provided to the military. And then many of the participants did die of the syphilis. The study was stopped in 1972. Actually, it was after an article in Rolling Stone that came out that detailed it. Stanley Milgram experiment. This is where you had this little box that had lots of little levers that delivered a voltage. There's Stanley right there in front of his little box. And it was basically, here's the participant called the teacher in front of the little box, the levers. experimenter, some guy in a white lab coat, and then behind a curtain there was a student that was supposedly wired to the box. It was actually a fake shock machine with the teacher, student, and experimenter. The participant was told to teach a student to memorize the words. If they didn't do it right, they got punished by a shock. They had 30 levers, each one an additional 15 volts. With each mistake, the teacher pulled the lever and thought that they were shocking the student. The teacher was led to believe that he or she was shocking the student, who screamed and asked to leave at higher voltages and eventually fell silent. It was just a recorded track. The teacher questioned, this is from a quote from a book, if the teacher questioned continuing as instructed, the experimenter simply said, "The experiment requires that you go on." And then the quote is, "What the experiment shows is that the person whose authority I consider to be legitimate has a right to tell me what to do, and therefore I have an obligation to follow the orders. That person could make most people act contrary to their conscience." So that was the Milgram experiment in a nutshell. And then the last I wanted to go over is the Stanford prison experiments, where in the basement of the psychology building, the investigator Zimbardo had 24 college students, very similar building as our psychology building over here, and half of them were prison guards, half of them were prisoners, and in a very short period of time, a day or two, it got very extreme, where the guards really took on sort of bullying the prisoners, and the prisoners actually felt quite vulnerable. Says in his role as prison administrator, Zimbardo became so engrossed in the jail system that he didn't stop the experiment as soon as cruelty began. He said, "If I were simply the experimenter, I would have ended it after the second kid broke down. We all did bad things, including me." But that's diagnostic of the power situation. You can read that in the paper, I suppose. It said our planned 2-week investigation was stopped after only 6 days. And as it turned out, I saw about 2 years ago now, is Where Are They Now? Stanford Alumni Magazine had this guy on the cover, and 40 years, where are they now? And the woman who was in charge of the sort of project administrator, she's the one that said, "Hey, Zimbardo, we need to stop this. This is getting out of hand. These kids are going bonkers." They ended up getting married, as it turned out, so they're now husband and wife, Zimbardo and his lab coordinator. But they also followed the lives of these people 40 years. One guy is up in Idaho, in northern Idaho, and he gets up in the morning and does perimeter with his weapons, just of his 3 or 4 acre property, and another one's been divorced and married about a bunch of times. And anyway, it was very dramatic, and what happened to these people. One thing that's interesting is that both Zimbardo and Milgram went to high school together. Really? So these studies, but mostly the Tuskegee syphilis study, drove the government to form a commission to investigate how human subjects are used in biomedical and behavioral research. And it led to what's called the Belmont Report. It's got a lot longer name than that, but and it has 3 ethical principles that it's driven by. Oh, time to stop. We're almost done. Respect for persons or autonomy. So treat people as autonomous agents that can make their own decisions. Beneficence, do no harm. This whole idea of benefit to harm. And then justice, where don't use populations out of convenience. And then there's certain safeguards that have to do with justice. No problem. So it's overseen again by OHRP, which is, there's a bunch of regulations. The board reviews it. There's risks. There's consent. And we'll just stop at that point. All right. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, both near and far. See you next week. Same time, same place.